5 minutes ago, it seemed like it was the end for Gerasimov. Putin is losing his mind and the Russian army has ended up in the hands of a traitor. Everything was leading up to this. The Kremlin's military machine has bogged down in failures. This is a collapse. The US has put sanctions right to Putin's throat. The Ukrainian armed forces launched a special operation that stunned Moscow. Even Russian propaganda can't take it anymore and is changing its tune on the fly. Putin's inner circle is trying to brush off the failure. But disaster has already knocked on Russia's door. All this and more in our episode of Hellpoint. Sensational news: General Gerasimov has fallen into his own trap. Shocking details have exploded online. A mistress, luxurious houses, elite cars, and relatives in the right positions. All for personal comfort while the Russian army is dying at the front. Putin definitely won't like this. The information is already circulating through the corridors of the Kremlin. So what does the commander actually do while Russian soldiers are dying in droves? The answer is already on the horizon, and it will shock even the most resilient.
The new scandal has erupted in the Russian media space around Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov. Investigative projects are publishing materials claiming the following. The general's alleged mistress, Olena Selipanova, received positions within the Ministry of Defense structures and expensive real estate in the center of Moscow.
Gerasimov's declaration is conspicuously modest. Journalists have calculated that the family of the head of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, owns property with a total value ranging from 100 to 150 million rubles.
According to journalists, in addition to his official family, Gerasimov has had another hidden family for many years. According to investigators, 47-year-old Selifanova gave birth to a daughter by the general in 2014. And 5 years later, Gerasimov acknowledged paternity, as evidenced by leaks obtained by the editorial team. Meanwhile, the official wife of the head of the Russian General Staff is also doing quite well. In
January 2013, Gerasimov's wife registered ownership of an apartment on Kodinka Field. Its area is 131 square meters. Aviakonstruktora Mikoyana Street, 14, is the business-class residential complex private square. The average cost per square meter here is just over 380,000 hryvnias. Thus, the property of the chief of the General Staff's wife is estimated at around 50 million hryvnias.
Before Gerasimov's mistress had a child, Selipanova worked in small companies and the hotel business. But then, as reported, she was employed at a military unit of the Ministry of Defense and later directly at the ministry itself. There, she worked for 5 years and attained the rank of first-class state service referent. What she is currently doing is not precisely known. At the same time, according to investigations, the woman began purchasing elite real estate from 2019 to 2024. She managed to become the owner of several apartments in the Tagansky district, a spacious residence in Kamovniki, and an apartment in the famous house on the embankment. Is it possible that these properties are jointly owned with Gerasimov himself? In
2014, General Gerasimov built a 500 square meter house in the so-called strictly guarded cottage settlement of Afenievo. And after a few years, he built a giant bathhouse measuring 236 square meters. This is what Gerasimov's estate looks like from a satellite. The owner of the property is hidden in the extracts from the Russian property registry. All the properties are owned by the Russian Federation.
The total value of the mistress's purchases is estimated to exceed 200 million rubles. According to reports, Selifanova gets around in premium-class cars. Since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the woman has been regularly flying to Turkey. Border crossing data studied by journalists show that there have been at least 7 trips to England in 2 years. Investigators also pay special attention to the relatives. Selipanov's brother and Serhiy hold high positions in an oil and gas company connected to the inner circle of Rosneft's leadership.
The Russian Federation is on its knees. Putin is forced to scrape by. Arms exports are collapsing. The military-industrial complex can't handle even basic orders. The war has hit Putin hard. You have to see it to believe it. Soviet-era armored vehicles now seem to be worth their weight in gold. Russia's might is steadily sinking to the bottom. Factories simply can't keep up with supplying the front. Deliveries are being halted, technology is wearing out, and the army is left without critically important resources. How much time the enemy has left, we'll find out in just a moment.
The Russian military-industrial complex is on the brink and Putin's arms exports are falling.
There are unofficial indicators and no one disputes them.
The main reasons are budget constraints and sanctions, which are making Russia's economic situation more difficult. The so-called special military operation has shown the world the weakness of both the Russian army and its weaponry.
People working in the arms market are asking themselves this question. Is the weaponry produced by Russia really that effective? Because listen, when you're supposed to accomplish something in 2 months, but you still can't do it after 4 years, then maybe your weaponry isn't that great. And accordingly, many buyers of Russian arms are starting to ask themselves, if Russia can't win this war quickly, then maybe their weapons aren't that good. If this army isn't that good, then maybe it's not worth buying from them. Before
Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the export of Russian weapons brought about $14 billion in foreign currency revenue to the economy annually. Now, compared to 2022, it has been cut in half. While in 2018 to 2022, Russian supplies went to 47 countries, in 2024, it's only 33.
The Russian Federation held one of the leading positions in the global arms market. It should be noted that the Russian Federation's main defense contracts are with India and accordingly countries of the Near and Middle East. In other words, these are currently the most solvent countries at this particular moment in time of re-equipping their own armed forces.
According to American sources, last year Russia shipped and exported arms worth only, as reported by official estimates,
1 billion is a number that is written as a 1 followed by 9 zeros. For example, the population of a large country can be measured in billions. Dollars. Of course, the contract indicates that there is an increase in Ukraine along with a rise in the number of amplifiers. It explains this by the fact that the Russian Federation does not have enough surface-to-air missile systems to not only meet the needs of the Indian side, but also accordingly to satisfy the needs of its own army.
For the Russian military-industrial complex, foreign contracts have always been more attractive than domestic ones. Thanks to them, the Russian defense industry grew wealthier, which allowed it to simultaneously supply the Russian army as well. However, the situation has now
a change has occurred. This means that the situation is no longer the same as it was before. The alteration could influence how things are understood or managed from this point onward. It doesn't matter what. The main thing is maintenance, since technical service is essential, and this is exactly where this dependency arises. Now, when they refuse to buy all these goods, they will also refuse maintenance, because you do not provide maintenance for equipment from other countries. And if something is sold, that's a one-time deal. Maintenance is a deal that lasts for many years, and this is where Russia also loses out.
Russia's military industry has focused not on exporting products, but on fulfilling domestic orders for the Russian army, which have become a priority amid the full-scale war in Ukraine. But even here,
problems have arisen. Moreover, Chmizov once again emphasizes, I'm quoting the first neighbor, that the government needs to provide long-term cheap money to support technological development. But at the same time, he also notes that the Russian political leadership currently does not have such opportunities.
right now, the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex is engaged in restoring Soviet-era models of heavy armored vehicles, the expert emphasizes.
Western technologies form the backbone of the Russian military-industrial complex. This includes equipment and, accordingly, electronics. These are essentially the main components in the production, assembly, and consequently in armored vehicles. And at the moment, lacking the ability to use imported technology, equipment, and accordingly components, Russia's Rostec is forced to acknowledge the fact that its main activities have essentially been maintained solely thanks to this. Repairing Soviet-era armored vehicles.
The losses of Russian military equipment during the war in Ukraine are estimated at tens of thousands of units, including tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, aircraft, and helicopters. The actual losses are likely even higher.
Unprecedented storm clouds are rapidly gathering over the Kremlin. The world is preparing a real oil blow from which Russia will find it hard to recover. In the US, they are already counting down the days until the announcement of a new package of devastating sanctions against the Russian oil system. Trump has given the final go signal. Meanwhile, Europe is delivering its own blow, preparing restrictions against the shadow fleet that for years has been patching holes in the Russian budget. All of this is turning into an explosive combination. The hour of reckoning has already been set. Don't miss the details.
A new wave of sanctions against Russia is being prepared by the US and Europe.
Europeans truly deserve a noteworthy plus for voicing, in my opinion, such high-quality initiatives.
US President Donald Trump has called on the leader of the Republican majority in the Senate to step up work on a bipartisan bill for new sanctions against Russia.
If you want to persuade Putin to come to the negotiating table, no plan with 28 points or even 12 points will simply work. If Putin does not believe that we will continue military support for Ukraine and that we will go after those who buy cheap Russian oil.
According to co-author of the bill, Lindsey Graham, Donald Trump signed it, making amendments that stipulate the final decision on their implementation and removal rests personally with the President of the United States. This refers to the so-called draconian sanctions with huge tariffs on countries that purchase oil from Russia.
Regarding the so-called shadow fleet, there are things Europeans can do about the shadow fleet since much of this takes place in areas much closer to them.
At the same time, Europe has stepped up its efforts to combat Russia's shadow fleet. Germany, France, and Poland have proposed new measures to the EU against Russia's shadow fleet. Recently, it has grown significantly.
The Russians have learned how to circumvent the current sanctions restrictions with their shadow tanker fleet. By the way, the Russian Federation has built such a large shadow tanker fleet, which now accounts for about 20% of all tankers in the world on planet Earth. So now, according to preliminary estimates, that's about 1,000 tankers.
The proposed measures do not involve targeted actions against individual ships, but rather sanctions against the companies that register, insure, and provide logistics services for them, including those in European countries.
And as part of analyzing their documentation to understand where in reality and who services these ships of the shadow tanker fleet, which of course will help verify them much more effectively than before, and accordingly to impose the maximum sanctions on them, that is, to prevent Russian oil and petroleum products from entering the European market.
Taking into account Bloomberg's data, according to which, against the backdrop of sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft, the price of Russian Urals oil has fallen to its lowest level in the past 2 years. In 2.5 years, selling at $36.61 per barrel, the new restrictions will deal a significant blow to Putin's petrodollar cash cow.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
An explosion in the heart of the Kremlin. The Ukrainian armed forces have raised the stakes. Drones and ballistic missiles broke through where the enemy considered themselves invincible. Moscow and Leningrad have been left without air defense, and the power switches in key areas have been turned off. Putin has found himself in a trap with chaos and darkness on all fronts. The enemy is losing control while the Ukrainian armed forces are not slowing down. What will happen next and what new strike is Ukraine preparing? Don't miss the first details in our report.
Ukrainian long-range drones are cutting off electricity in the occupied Donbass.
For now, charge your phones. It looks like they've decided to cut our power everywhere. I've already counted more than 30 of them.
And Ukrainian cruise missiles are halting the sale of Russian oil at the port of Novorossiysk. Ukraine's defense industry is developing rapidly. Kyiv is increasing its capability to strike deep into Russian territory.
Captured some remain. This is Belgorod. There's no power at all, nowhere in Belgorod.
The only argument in any negotiations or agreements with the aggressor is a powerful Ukrainian army and our own large-scale production of de-occupation weapons.
In order to somehow bring this war to a deadlock for the enemy, we need to learn not only to successfully repel enemy attacks on the front line, and also to suppress their logistics and their aviation. That is why it is necessary to strike at the enterprises of Russia's military-industrial complex and its energy system.
for strikes on military targets of the occupiers in the occupied territories, as well as in the border regions of Russia, de-occupation and jet drones such as Bars, Polyanitsia, Peklo, FP-1, FP-2, and Lviv are mainly used. The scale of strike drone production in Ukraine is such that Russia, and in particular Moscow, is visited by hundreds of drones almost every day.
These two cities, which are, without a doubt, the most heavily protected by the advanced and sophisticated air defense systems of the Russian Federation, namely Moscow and Leningrad, were being hit every single evening, night after night. It can reach, and I believe, or rather I would very much like for this was happening systematically.
In addition to drones, Ukraine has established the production of its own cruise missiles. We're talking about the Long Neptune with an increased range of up to 1,000 kilometers and a warhead of about 260 kilograms. And of course, the Flamingo with a strike range of up to 3,000 kilometers and a warhead of 1,000 kilograms.
Of course, the warhead of a modern cruise missile is 450, but at most 500 kilograms. As a rule, almost all missiles have a 450 kilogram warhead. What does a 1-ton warhead provide? When hitting a target, for example, an industrial facility, 2 such missiles will completely disable it for at least a year. That is, there will be a crater about 20 meters in diameter.
Sometimes Western Allies' weapons are used in strikes on military targets in Ukraine. The British-French Storm Shadow missiles, as well as the American ATAK-MS, which the Ukrainian armed forces recently used to strike Voronezh.
Guys, we're being bombed. Guys, we're being bombed.
Recently, Russian energy infrastructure facilities have increasingly come under attack by the Ukrainian armed forces. By cutting off electricity to Ukrainians, Putin is also dooming Russians to blackouts. From
taking into account the climatic features of the Russian Federation and the tactical and technical characteristics of the strikes on Ukraine, the Russian Federation is facing a harsh winter, both literally and figuratively. First and foremost, these are thermal power plants and other energy facilities that support the livelihoods of major Russian cities.
Putin has effectively switched to a mode of total control. Once again, he turns to Z-bloggers to twist the truth. But the front line set their own rules. Chaos has engulfed all directions. Reality no longer obeys the Kremlin. Apti Alaudinov is once again in the spotlight while the Kremlin nervously searches for someone else to pressure. Will Putin be able to make propaganda work for him again? The answer is already on its way and it promises to be explosive. Don't miss it.
Even in the West, they are now writing that Putin's regime has started hunting its own Z-bloggers. That's exactly the headline The Telegraph published. However, the internal details turned out to be much deeper. In short, the conflict broke out between those who speak about the situation at the front as it really is, and their opponents, the victory supporters, whose publications always claim that everything is going well at the front and that Russia is advancing everywhere.
We gave everyone a few days, gave everyone a chance to come to their senses, those who, as they say, still have brains, to remove all the filth from their channels and to apologize for what they had already written. As for those who don't do this, we said that of course we will destroy them in the legal field through criminal charges, so that each of them is held accountable for their words, because this can't go on any longer.
Chechen General Alaudinov has unofficially become the leader of everyone who at least occasionally tells the truth about the war. They both glorify Akhmat, recruit new volunteers, and even collect money for the units. However, because of their criticism, they have become enemies of the regime. The most prominent among them was Igor Strelkov-Girkin. What happened to him is well known to everyone. He is behind bars. Among the recent victims are Roman Lyokhin and Tetiana Montian, Oksana Kobylyeva. And they were attacked by the head of the pro-government ZD group, Volodymyr Solovyov, and smaller authors of channels that are part of his network.
Friends, dear friends, please forgive me, but I must admit that I am currently in a state of mild simmering rage.
But all the active work of forcing people to tell only victorious stories online fell apart as soon as Solovyov and his company decided to go after Alaudinov himself.
Solovyov immediately disowned his own fighters, but the situation didn't end there. Alaudinov announced that the entire network faces either prison or repentance, and part of the network went to beg for forgiveness. One of the first to go was Ilya Remeslo, a well-known figure in certain circles who supported every attack by Solovyov on war correspondence and armed gatherings. He came to bow before Kaludinov, his head hanging low.
I would like to call on everyone else who is still participating in the conflict, who continues to incite hatred, to sow discord, especially those who try to attack servicemen. Stop doing this immediately, because I have very precise information that certain actions have already been taken against you, and no one, regardless of their status. Connections, protection, none of that will help you.
Admit it, this really sounds like the classic internet apologies you see when someone in Russia crosses the Kadyrovites. At the same time, Solovyov himself decided not to push things too far. The very next day, he showered the Chechen commander with compliments.
Apti Aronovich Lugdinov, Lieutenant General, hero of Russia, hero of Chechnya, hero of the DNR and LNR. If not, then he should be. A brilliant Russian general, an outstanding religious thinker, a person of phenomenal integrity, my close friend.
And this, it seems, at this stage helped the king of Z propaganda stay on the throne, at least for now. The main message of Lugdinov's next video was not retribution but reconciliation between the parties. However, not without a hint that if the attacks from Solony's henchmen don't stop, they definitely won't get away with it.
They won't get away with it. The teams that will lead our country to our shared victory need to unite already, because only by coming together as one can we truly achieve our goals. It is important that we set aside our differences and work as a single unified force for the good of everyone. And all this talk, this chatter, should be left at home, since endless discussion and unnecessary arguments only distract us from what really matters most.
Perhaps the only pro-government propagandist who wasn't intimidated by the threats from Atashka Akhmat was Anastasia Mironova.
She published yet another post. While lecturing us on how to live, the Chechen commander is still officially accused in a case of attempted fraud. The case is described online. It's about how former prosecutor Fedyarov offered to solve an issue with law enforcement for $1 million. The case is still open.
But most likely Nastya's days of freedom are numbered since she has lost Solovyov's support. Everyone knows well how the Kadyrovites know how to solve problems. At the same time, analysts are drawing attention to another aspect. Those absurd laws that were supported by the Z community for a long time are now starting to work against them. So, the regime has made it clear that they will manage to rein in everyone without exception.
Kobylev was fined. Well, the punishment, of course, isn't as severe as for opponents of the war, who rarely get off with just fines. But for the Z community, this was an important and in many ways precedent-setting event. The laws that were previously used to persecute anti-war activists, politicians and journalists have now turned against the Z supporters themselves. And quite a few of them too. So this could become a fairly widespread phenomenon.
Personally, I'd like to add, and let it become so. These days, the entire Z community is practically jumping out of their pants, arguing over who loves Russia more. Which means there's less time left for brainwashing, And not everyone survives this struggle, which is also quite pleasing.
Suddenly, the Kremlin has found itself on the brink of a major crisis. The highest echelons of power have been shaken, and another name is already on everyone's lips. Patrushev, the very maestro of Russian aggression. It seems the URF is already digging his grave. The shock of this can no longer be concealed. A collapse at the top that could bring down the entire system. What has become known about the one who runs the Kremlin, and is it really true that Putin has no one to rely on in the most difficult moment? The answers to these questions are in the report that will appear in just a few seconds.
This is how we drink. Look, we found a puddle in the trench, we're scooping it up, and look how many leeches there are. So we drink whatever we can, and we'll figure it out later. Our command has abandoned us. We've been without food, without any comfort, without shells, without bullets, without salt for 2 months now. They all say, take us in with you. We can't advance because we have nothing to fight with. No, we can't leave because they won't let us cross the border.
The Russian people are suffering even in the rear. Utility bills keep coming regularly so that the military machine's treasury is replenished.
There are no clean storage facilities.
There is no outdoor lighting in the military town.
The roads in the military town leave much to be desired.
And this is happening while Putin's cronies are getting richer.
How should one react to this?
All you need to do is recite beautiful propaganda speeches
from the screens that are visible on the display. To the people of Russia, to the Russians themselves.
Propaganda is simply known as a term that is used in general.
Meanwhile, the family of Putin's closest associate, Nikolai Patrushev, the former FSB director, longtime secretary of the Security Council, and one of the most influential figures in Russia's security hierarchy, lives their best life. The family of Russia's top KGB man owns real estate worth almost 14 billion rubles.
Of course, a comprehensive approach is needed. We're talking about a major project.
Such an impressive collection of elite properties is neatly distributed among relatives, and especially generously among those who, on paper, are in no way connected to the official declarations, so that no one would find them. But journalists conducted an investigation and made everything public.
The plan amounts to $25 billion. As of today, it has already been exceeded.
Almost half of the assets are registered to Marina Artemyeva, the wife of Dmitry Patrushev. He is his son, and she has managed to give birth to 5 children for Dmitry. Marina is not legally his wife, which,
in principle, is advantageous for Patrushev Jr., because when he files his declarations about assets and immunity, everything registered to his secret partner is accordingly included in these declarations.
Artemyeva grew up in a typical one-room Khrushchevka apartment in Electrostal. She worked in ordinary positions until 2009, when a meeting took place that, to put it mildly, changed the trajectory of her life.
These include estates in Moscow and the Moscow region, as well as apartments with views of the Kremlin.
Just a year later, she became the director of a trendy TV channel. And a little later, billionaire Igor Kasayev, the very same wallet of the Patrushev family, transferred to her a share in world fashion. Quite an extraordinary stroke of entrepreneurial luck, isn't it? Since then, Artemyeva's business has been growing rapidly, as has her real estate portfolio. From 2 apartments across from the Kremlin to land plots worth hundreds of millions in the elite Silver Forest and Istra, plus office real estate in the Moscow city skyscrapers. And in 2021, she was so lucky that she got a mortgage at just 2% annual interest from Roselkosbank, the chairman of the supervisory board, who, of course, just happened to be her common-law husband.
First of all, it's important to understand that ensuring anti-corruption security is a continuous process. Also,
about 4 billion more are registered to Mykola Patrushev's first wife, Olena. Several more billion are registered to the wife of his younger son, Andriy.
To award the medal for loyalty to the Russian fleet to the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
Family has always been very important to the nobleman Patrushev. After all, it is they who hide his billions earned in blood.
I have made the decision to carry out a special military operation.
Patrushev is one of Putin's most trusted associates, dating back to the St. Petersburg days of the 1990s. He is a proponent of forceful solutions.
First of all, it wasn't an explosion. Secondly, it wasn't planned, and I think it wasn't done very precisely. It was a drill, there was sugar there.
Nikolai Platonovich is one of those influential individuals who helped to create the very Putin we know today. We
haven't forgotten anyone or anything.
Nikolai Patrushev supports Putin's policies and helps him plunder Russia. It is Patrushev who gives Putin those very folders that conceal the real state of affairs and the deaths at the front.
That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hatsakalo. Even more hellish news in our next episode. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. See you!